So the American Planning Association has done a lot of work in this area. I am an urban planner, and so this is my professional organization. A lot of this work and many of the resources that I'll talk about today come from or related to work that's been done by the American Planning Association. One of the gentleman in the black shirt in that picture, Carlton Illy, is a leader in the field in planning and in social equity planning. This framework, and this has really just been done in the past, over the course of the past year, provides planners with a framework for promoting equity in development, balancing growth with community goals, and guidance is designed to help planners and developers achieve just and equitable ends that preserve the community fabric and promote community cohesion. So urban flight resulted in a lot of disinvestment and a lot of disparities that didn't really exist before then. Environmental justice, which is, let me just go back. The Environmental Protection Agency's guidance on environmental justice works toward restoration and recovery of communities. It provides a path for change that does not result in a continuation of displacement or discrimination. So that's the goal of environmental justice. It comes from
Charnelle.
Yes.
I'm sorry, your audio has been kind of cutting out, so folks are having a hard time hearing you. Are you as close to the mic as you can be?
I can get closer. Is that better?
That actually does sound better. Great, keep going.
Awesome. Awesome. So the environmental justice, what number? We're on 6. Sorry about that. So the environmental justice framework that was put forth by the Environmental Protection Agency provides a framework, again, to reverse historical discrimination in policy and decision making. So
I might recommend maybe turning off your camera because it cut out again. Let's see if that helps.
Okay, let's see. Is that better?
Keep going.
Okie doke. All right, so this is a policy statement from 1996. It's an early response to discrimination by federal agencies. It recognizes policies encouraging displacement and environmental hazards. If we go on to just the next slide. The environmental justice work is a concept that's come out of a continuing pattern of discrimination against minority communities. Next. I spend a little bit more time on this slide. Initially, the environmental justice context was used for in public health, zoning and permitting decisions, lack of pollution, and nuisance uses result in significant poor health outcomes in minority communities. In infrastructure, the high development of our interstate highway systems devastated many minority communities, and community development housing policies encouraged segregation and a concentration of poverty. Environmental justice recognized that real data provided proof that government agencies were in fact violating the civil rights of minority communities, the elderly, disabled, and immigrants. So initially, environmental justice and the analysis of environmental justice really documented how government policies and federal government actions were discriminatory. And so it seems like more recently it's more of environmental justice and social equity sort of feel good thing. It's actually a response to very long-term, deliberate, discriminatory and illegal practices. The next one. So environmental justice policies are intended to prevent and mitigate legal discrimination in government actions and in decision making. The goal is to analyze the effects, analyze and quantify the effects of government actions, and to ensure that vulnerable populations don't suffer a share of negative impacts. And going beyond just the negative impacts, environmental justice also means that communities of color, disabled, and other minority groups get to enjoy their fair share of the benefits of government action, including action related to zoning, permitting, and allowing development. So we'll go to the next slide. So again, when we look at the impact and benefits of development, we can ask how much of the change meets community needs and how much is too much or too fast, and a way that can potentially result in harm to our communities and a continuation of discriminatory policies. So I provided some resources on environmental justice, talk about EJ and how the concept was developed and how it applied to community development. And I've asked my colleague, James Phillips, to review some of the methods and metrics to achieve more just and equitable development. Jamie?
Thanks, Charnelle.
Before we turn it over to you, Jamie, we did still continue to have problems with your audio, Charnelle. If you happen to have the presentation, the verbal presentation that you just gave written up somewhere, if you want to send it to me, I can share it with everybody. So if they missed any pieces, they can share your comments.
I can also send it to you. I can send the presentation to you with voiceover.
Great. There you sounded wonderful. All right, turn it over to you, Jamie.
Thank you. Is my audio coming through all right?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, hello everybody. My name is Jamie Phillips and I'm an urban planner at CH Planning. And I'm going to talk today a little bit about methods for environmental justice analysis. Environmental justice, which Charnelle covered in the beginning of the presentation, is mainly used in transportation and environmental planning, and that is because it's required by the National Environmental Protection Act, NEPA, and it's required for metropolitan planning organizations doing regional transportation planning. We believe that environmental justice analysis could be useful for other fields like community economic development, and we think that the methods could translate to increase equitable development. I want to note before I begin that public engagement, which is often seen as one of the only methods to implement environmental justice, is absolutely key in the steps that I'm going to go over, but it's not limited to environmental justice, which is why I'm going to go over some of the other methods of how to implement environmental justice. So the first step in doing an environmental justice analysis that we use is to create a profile of the impacted area and population. In transportation and environmental planning, the things that are required for this profile are demographic and socioeconomic information, but there are many groups that have expanded this to include people with disabilities, children, seniors, and other groups besides just minority and low income. So it's been expanded, and it might include things like household size or renter versus owner or travel to work information as well. So thinking about how that might translate to community development, some things that that profile might include would be demographic and socioeconomic information, renter versus owner, information about cost burden households, segregation in the area, as well as historical displacement and current displacement pressures. The second step is to identify negative and positive impacts. Within transportation and environmental planning, this often includes health impacts like air quality, noise, pollution, as well as access to food, services, education, shopping, healthcare. Within community development, some of the things that you might think about would be, of course, the traditional real estate value and taxes, but also gentrification and displacement, economic opportunities, including jobs, placemaking, transportation and streetscape improvements, and health impacts, less so in the way of air quality, like in transportation, but potentially in food access, access to services, and green space in a development. The third step for environmental justice analysis is to then quantify those impacts and determine if there are disproportionately high impacts. So some things that can be quantified, of course, traditionally, real estate value and taxes. For transportation, this often involves modeling of air quality, flooding impacts, pollution and noise modeling, and it might also include looking at kind of the regional investment patterns to see if those are equitable or not, looking at which mode is being invested in. So thinking about community development, some things that we might consider would be, of course, traditionally new real estate value and taxes would be measured, but some things that might also be able to be quantified or at least touched on in determining those impacts are displacement pressures, jobs, and especially who are they for, the education that they would require, green space, flooding and stormwater impacts, the access to food and services, whether that might increase or decrease, placemaking and its impact on retail as well as the community, and then discussing a sense of community ownership. So the final step for environmental justice analysis is once you've identified the positive and negative impacts in a project, you seek opportunities to amplify those benefits and mitigate the adverse impacts. So within transportation and environmental planning, this often includes attempting to reduce pollution, move around investment to make it more equitable, or invest in modes like transit, biking, pedestrian, and trails that are more heavily used by minority, low-income children and seniors who are included in environmental justice. Thinking about how this might translate to community development, some things that might amplify benefits and mitigate adverse impacts include creating a community benefit agreement, which Steve will talk about after this in more detail, reducing displacement, hiring from the community, placemaking, transportation, and streetscape improvements, attracting grocery stores or other services that the community may be lacking, as well as using public engagement, which is key in all of these steps, but especially here to create a sense of community ownership that the development can positively impact the community. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Charnelle and Jamie. So now we have time for 1 to 2 questions for the both of you. So if any attendees have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box. But we'll start with the question of what do you think, from a planning perspective, are some tangible strategies that you can use during the development process of a project to create a sense of community ownership that you talked about, Jamie?
Thanks for that question, Olivia. I think in creating a sense of community ownership, that something like a community benefit agreement can be key, where you're actually working with the community to determine needs, as well as public engagement. While I emphasize that public engagement is not the only method for environmental justice, it is an important method to engage the community and determine needs and how development could meet those needs, or transportation projects or environmental projects could meet those needs.
I'd like to add to that, to build on the need for community engagement. One thing that we do, that we like to do when we can, is to ask the community about what their values are, the things that are important to them. so that new development be welcomed into the community, and so new neighbors can understand sort of what they're buying into when they join a community.
Great, thanks so much. Now we'll be hearing from Steve.
Everybody, really happy to be here and to be together with Councilwoman Gaudier and Charnelle and Jamie. CHP Planning is a great organization. We use them in my zoning practice and I highly recommend them. So today we're going to focus on the community benefit agreement process and talk about some of the a couple examples. Let's go forward. Because I'm a lawyer, I have to give you a disclaimer that what we're talking about today isn't going to be creating an attorney-client relationship with any of you. I can't even see who you are, so that would be difficult in and of itself. But it's not that I'm against helping you in a more direct way. That'd be awesome, but that's not what's going to be happening right now. So I want to go back in time, definitely kind of like to the beginning of time, to say that this question of what is equitable and justice in real estate development goes back to the Tower of Babel. And that's pretty much, you know, I think the first, in our mythology, the first large development project that we as humans, you know, took on. And while the sin of the Tower of Babel is the conventional sense about it is that it was about the hubris and the arrogance of humans who thought that they could reach the heavens or whatever. There are all these different interpretations, and there's one that I really like that came out of some rabbis in the Talmud. And that was looking at what was really going on with the construction of the Tower of Babel. And it turned out, according to this myth, that it was so tall that it took people carrying bricks from the ground all the way to the top a year to actually get high enough to place the bricks to keep building the tower. That was a huge investment of energy and time on the part of the developers of that day. And as the tower got bigger, what happened was the builders, the developers, let's call them, they started to view the bricks as more precious than the people. So that if a person who was one of the construction people fell off the tower and died because it was pretty tall, they stopped really caring. They stopped paying attention to that at all. But if a brick would fall from the heights, they would weep and fall on the ground and say, "Woe, woe unto us! How will we get another brick to replace it?" So those commentators say that the sin of the Tower of Babel was that was placing the value of the brick and mortar and the development itself higher than the value that we give to humans and the dignity that we all need to give to each other. So that's a great, not that it's going to win the day in court or with a developer, but it's good to know that that this goes way back, and equity and justice and development has been a core challenge for humanity for quite a while. Let's go on. So the community benefits approach, it's really a strategic reorientation of how, of the zero-sum game that typically goes on in terms of development. It's not about deciding as a community development corporation or as a community group that you don't want to fight against a development or that you don't really like a development. It's not a preference, it's an approach that basically says that if a development is done in a win-win way, then the community can benefit along with the developer, and therefore you kind of pivot away from this if they win, we lose. If we win, they lose, to a format and a paradigm where the only way that anybody wins is if everybody wins. So why would developers want to do a community benefit agreement? It's obviously pretty easy to understand why communities would like to do community benefits agreements. It's kind of like in the name, it would suggest why communities are kind of into that. But what's in it for developers? So development is a very time-sensitive process. Anything that prolongs the timetable for a development puts the funding, the whole success of the project in jeopardy. A lot of developers highly value, for that reason, they highly value certainty in the development process. And there's a lot that we know that's uncertain. Like, we've just been spending a whole bunch of months in a completely uncertain, unfamiliar environment. And you don't need a pandemic to understand that development projects can go south for many different ways. But developers value community benefits agreements because they then have the certainty that the community, which is pretty much the only constituency that's going to try to derail their development, is going to be you know, joining with them. So you know, there's a lot of other, there many times developers actually want to do some of the same things that the community is going to be coming to them with. So there's a lot of an alignment. But it turns out that there are many types of community benefit demands that don't really have a price tag to them. And so many developers who are afraid of being, they use pejorative terms like being shaken down or being taken to the cleaners. They just don't understand that in many ways, community benefits agreements are not going to alter the cost of their development. So the critical piece of a community, a CDC, a community group moving in the direction of a community benefits agreement, many people think the critical piece is actually coming up with what your demands are and what your vision is for the community benefits agreement. Those are important. Those are really essential. But I'm gonna suggest today that that's not the critical piece, because you can have the most amazing community benefits agreement. You can have this process with all kinds of focus groups or conversations, and you can completely nail down what the top priorities are for your neighborhood, and you could be completely correct. But if you can't figure out a way to get leverage over this project with the developer and with the public officials, then you're gonna basically not win. You're not gonna get anywhere close to getting a community benefits agreement. So you need to really drill down into the development process and figure out every permit, every process that this development has to go through, so you can figure out what are your points of the points where you can have the greatest impact, and also where you can create a lot of obstacles or challenges for the developer if the developer is of a mindset that they just kind of want to move through this process without your helpful input. So, you know, subsidies, development approvals, that's like any kind of permits, any kind of agency, even just stamps on plans that aren't even considered formal permits. Anything that has to happen, any touch points, you need to know, you need to map all that out, and you need to figure out whether there's things that you're too late for, or things that you're just in time for, or things that you got a while to go before it's important. Because even if you know all these things, if you kind of miss those timetables, then it doesn't help you so much. All right, it's gone. So I don't mean to to discount what the actual substance of a community benefit agreement is. That's obviously the most important part of the community benefit agreement. We'll talk about the accountability and enforcement in the next slide, but this list are kind of the greatest hits from a lot of community benefits agreements that have come out across the country, and they depend on the exact terms really are what you as a CDC and a community group come together and figure out with your neighbors. The most important thing that I would say about this list is that any goal that you pick for a community benefit agreement has to be obvious to pretty much everyone in your community that is not just a really good thing to have, but that they will notice, they will experience a tangible difference in their lives if you win that. So if you have some kind of goals and you find yourself having to sell it to people and explain to them, no, you just don't understand, this is really important. If like your neighbors don't get that why that's important, that's not a critical part of your community benefits agreement. You have to form your community benefit agreement demands around very tangible, clear victories that everybody gets. Like, yeah, that's obvious, we totally need that, that would be amazing. It also has to be things that are winnable. So there might be many demands that you as a community are really clear about. Everybody has no question. It would completely change the quality of life of your neighborhood, but it's not something that maybe the scale of it is off. It's not going to happen in that size of a development, or it's just not something that you can pull off. That's also not a great goal for a community benefit agreement, because not only does it have to be tangible and a clear victory, but it has to be winnable. Okay, let's go on. So what makes it effective? Okay, so let's say you got the right points of contact, you get leverage, you work with an awesome council person like Jamie Gaudier, and you get a community benefit agreement together. Then you come to find out, whoa, the developer is like breaking our agreement. What are we going to do about it? What can we do about it? So this is a vulnerability with community benefit agreements, that many of them are put together in such a way that they're not legally binding, or that they don't have key accountability provisions in there so that nothing bad happens to a developer who breaks the agreement. Community benefit agreements, for that reason, it's helpful to have a lawyer work with you on it. But the basic idea here is that a lot of times you'll find that developers will come to the table and give you language that sounds good, but it actually, there's like no there. Once you kind of look at it and kind of game it out, you'll see that they have so much wiggle room that they can basically get around most of the provisions. That's not a community benefits agreement. That's unfortunately like some kind of a wish list or if we can, we'd love to kind of thing, and that's not what we're talking about. So I wanted to touch on three examples of community benefits agreements that I did to just give you a little bit of a flavor on them. And how are we doing on time, Olivia? We have...
You're good, yeah.
Okay, good. All right.
5 more, yeah, you can take your time.
Cool. So the first one was when I was a city council attorney. I was in city council as an attorney for 12 years and worked on a lot of community benefit agreements for different council people. This one is the union transfer agreement. So there used to be this really big family restaurant on Spring Garden Street called the spaghetti warehouse. I would ask people to raise your hand, but I can't see anybody, so it doesn't really, but I would imagine anybody who had kids or ate pasta knew about this place. It was very big. It was like, it was just enormous, and but it wasn't the kind of place that would have any kind of an impact on the surrounding neighborhood, because it was just a bunch of people that went there and ate pasta and then they left. Union Transfer is a really happening concert venue that wanted to, that the Spaghetti Warehouse wanted to sell their property to Avram Hornick, the developer, to put in Union Transfer. Spring Garden is kind of the, at that point, this was in the mid 2000s, Spring Garden was the dividing line between the West Poplar neighborhood and the Callow Hill neighborhood. Callow Hill was a more whiter, more affluent community, and West Poplar was a community of color and had more lower income folks. So my sense from working with them was that they weren't that used to working together on things, because they basically, the West Poplar folks would do things in their neighborhood, the Callow Hill neighborhood folks would do things in their neighborhood. This was on their border, and whatever impact was going to happen from Union Transfer was definitely going to go in both directions. For some reason, which I don't recall, Councilman at the time, Council Member DeChico didn't want to be involved with this negotiation, but Curtis Thomas, the state rep, did. So the state rep came in and brought me in, and we mediated and negotiated this community benefit agreement. The developer was very, very interested in doing, he was a social impact oriented developer. He wanted an agreement, but that doesn't mean that the community, just because a developer is friendly or pro community benefit, that doesn't mean the community is going to get what they want. It just means the negotiations are going to have less yelling and less kind of drama with them. So he needed a bunch of state permits. He needed liquor licenses. It was like there was city permits, there was like food and special assembly occupancy and everything. So the leverage that the community had there was that he had a lot of steps he needed to go through where the community opposition could derail him at any moment. And so we were able to put together an agreement that had pieces that West Poplar wanted, pieces that Callow Hill wanted, with the help of Curtis Thomas, and I'm pretty sure it's been a successful agreement to this day. 60th Street corridor, a local masjid brought me in. They have a CDC on 60th Street, and they had been working with the former councilperson in Councilmember Gaudier's district about getting some properties that were across the street from them that they were developing. They were using it for their like social service, feeding the hungry and doing all kinds of community work. They were going to get those empty lots and build a new mosque on them. One day, they came to the mosque and found that there were all these orange posters on the properties that they were taking care of that said that they were part of this new big development, scattered site commercial corridor revitalization that the Planning Commission and Councilwoman Blackwell had worked on with this developer, Scott Mazo. They were shocked, they were upset, and they wanted my help to get some justice here. So we were in time to fight the zoning the whole way through from the zoning board on, and as a result, we were able to put together a community benefit agreement that not only got the properties back to the mosque that they had been promised previously, but a few more properties that they could develop for affordable housing, all kinds of local hiring, and basically it positioned Progressive Community CDC as the legitimate CDC in that neighborhood. The project had brought in a CDC from another part of West Philly, which is not a good move when you're dealing with community engagement. Okay, last one was in Lower Merion Township. Carl Dranoff had a giant development he was doing in Ardmore, and we were brought in by these businesses, these small businesses that were all along what's called Cricket Lot, which is the main parking lot. It was the main parking lot in downtown Ardmore. There was the Business Alliance group that was basically in the pocket of Carl Dranoff, and they basically sold out these small businesses. So they came to us and said, you know, we think we're all going to be shut down, and because the parking lot is going to be closed for like a year and a half in construction, and no one is going to be able to come to our business. And so we were out of time on the zoning. The zoning ship had sailed, and it was in many different ports, but it was not in a port that we could access. So we found in that case that there was another permit, another process that had to happen, which was there was actually a paper, what's called a paper street. There was a street that was still on the plans of Lower Merion Township that went through the land where Carl Dranoff wanted to build his building. And of course, you can't have a street that goes through your building unless you're like, I don't know, the Lincoln Tunnel, you know, or something like that. In New York City, it just doesn't work so well. So they had to go through a process to basically remove that street from the plans. And so we litigated and fought that, and were able to get a whole bunch of community benefits agreement with all these safeguards for these businesses so they could survive during the construction period. And we also made sure that the new parking lot that was created there would still be for customers of businesses that would have short-term parking and not commuter parking, which would have taken away, you know, all the possibility for people to go to their businesses once everything was done. All right, I think I've hit my 5 minutes there. So here's my my farewell slide here. So Partnership for Working Families, great organization. Definitely go to communitybenefits.org. They have a ton of information about community benefit agreements. They will work with you and provide you with resources and guidance. And then we're also available too. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. So we have time for a couple of questions for you. So if anyone has any questions, please remember you can post in the Q&A section. But we'll start with, can you suggest any metrics or strategies that could be used to measure the success of a CBA after it's written and decided? How do you maintain like long-term success, or how do you measure whether it was successful?
Yeah, so first, it's a great question, because in the process of developing your community benefit agreement, you as the community, CDC community group, coalition, you want to be focused on those kind of metrics so that you know what it is that you want to be achieving, and that the rest of the community can see it and experience it, and there's like a consensus, you know, that so I mean, sometimes if it's about financial support, let's say like what Penn did with Penn Alexander, if it's about you know, capacity building or certain kind of resources, that's a clear metric that's easy to measure. If it's around things like displacement, then that can be metrics around affordable housing or around you know, certain kinds of demographic data. But you also want to build in an ongoing accountability mechanism. So a community benefit agreement shouldn't be thought of as like you negotiate it, you sign it, and it's over. You really want to be part of a continuing monitoring process where your key people are recognized as, let's say sometimes there's like quarterly reports. This happens with the EOPs that are done on the city level for the economic opportunity plans when there's like large public projects, but there's no reason why you can't have that in any community benefit agreement, so that you can monitor, you can continue to have those kinds of conversations with the developer, and then the agreement can provide for modifications that are necessary to recalibrate things if things are not happening the way they're supposed to.
Great, thanks so much. And now we'll hear from Councilmember Gautier.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, thanks so much to PACDC for taking this annual conference virtual. It's an important event, and I'm glad that we still could do it. And thanks to everyone participating in the audience today. My name is Councilmember Jamie Gautier, and I represent the 3rd District, which includes parts of West and Southwest Philadelphia. My hope for today is to share the origins of my equitable development agenda for the 3rd District, give you some examples of how it has been going this year, and present some of my next steps that I hope can be a jumping off point for a conversation about how Philadelphians can engage with their elected officials on these types of issues. So why is equitable development a cornerstone of my agenda? Because it's what I've been fighting for my entire career. I'm an urban planner by trade. Before running for council, I worked for a long time in the community and economic development field. And so I've been fighting for these issues for a long time. And they've come up again, from district residents from the earliest days of my campaign. I feel really fortunate to represent an area of the city where we have so many assets, right? We have most of the city's eds and meds are located in the 3rd District. This is a place where people want to live. This is a place where there's a lot of economic activity, but I only see those as assets to the extent that they benefit the people who have, particularly Black and brown people who have been living here for a long time, right? What good is it to have jobs here if I have 36% of my residents in poverty, right? What good is it to have this be a hotspot for development if it's displacing Black people from the neighborhoods that they used to live in, right? Additionally, a lot of the institutions were built on Black neighborhoods, decimated Black neighborhoods, and there was never any recompense for that, right? And so that's why this agenda is incredibly important to me. Next slide, please. No, previous slide, please. I knew early on that I had to be very intentional about making equitable development a part of my agenda. I had to be able to define it, to talk about it, and to be transparent about my goals, right? And how I want to be held accountable to those goals. So up here on the slide is how my team and I have defined equitable development. There are a lot of different components to it, and figuring out how to structure that started with creating a director of equitable development position within my team. Creating this position was one way that I hope I can demonstrate how important these principles are to my agenda. And it's a way of me implementing, right, and achieving success. And so I winded up hiring Andrew Goodman to fill this role. He's an urban planner. He's an incredible fighter for the people in the district. And pushing forward this agenda is his day-to-day role. And I think it's important to say that policies aren't neutral, right? Policies aren't colorblind. As elected officials, we need to be intentional about communicating that and making sure that we are centering ourselves around those who are often disenfranchised by policies that do not fully incorporate their perspectives and their points of view. Next slide, please. The city and the district itself is rife with inequities, and I wanted to be grounded in this from the very beginning to help guide my work and how I communicate with my constituents. One of the first things that I did in starting on council last session was to commission a housing study for the 3rd District. Because access to safe, healthy, affordable housing is such a foundational component to having a high quality of life. I wanted to start there to get a sense of how deep the need was, and not surprisingly, it's very deep. These are some of the figures that were uncovered from our housing study. I won't go through all of the details, but I hope to publish the full study very soon. In short, the study affirms that what has been done to date to try to help 3rd District constituents is not enough, and we have to do much better. 1 in 6 3rd District constituents are spending too much of their income on housing every month. 1 in 15 pay more than half their income on housing each month. In a district of majority renter households, 85% of those who are cost burdened earn less than $20,000 a year, meaning they earn less than 25% of the region's area median income. These conditions didn't happen overnight, nor do they happen by accident. They're results of decades of racist policy that favor racist institutions, and they have led to a significant loss of generational wealth for people of color in this district and across the city as well. So contrary to what many of us planners learned in school, being equal is not enough. It's not enough for us to address the root causes and oppressive systems that got us to these conditions. In order to be equitable, we need to elevate the voices and the needs of those in the district who are cost burdened, those who are making tough choices every day to support their families, those who are most vulnerable to displacement as the private real estate development market in the 3rd District continues to get hotter. And that's how I prioritize and look at my work. Next slide, please. It's only been, I started in January, even though it seems like, with everything that's happened, it seems like 5 years have passed. But I started in January, and it has been an incredibly busy time. Council is already a busy an active place. Our constituents have a number of needs during good times. And so throwing in all of these crises have just made the work, the needs more urgent and have made the work even busier. I feel good overall about what we accomplished this session. I mean, we didn't get as far as I would have wanted in some areas, but I think we made some big achievements. And I can go through a couple of these examples of what we accomplished this year and of how we're working with our residents. I started in January. We were quarantined in March, and before I knew it, we were into city budget hearings, facing hundreds of millions of dollars of deficits. During this time, my team and I were working around the clock with advocates and community organizations to get all of their concerns on the record with the administration. I made a commitment during the budget season to meet with affordable housing advocates on a weekly basis. We were working inside and outside the tent to ensure that $20 million was restored to the Housing Trust Fund. And we won that fight. And while the $20 million won't all go to the 3rd District, pushing on citywide needs like these is an essential role that we as legislators have to play in making sure that city officials are responding to what we're hearing from our constituents. At the same time as the budget hearings were happening, we were working with 2 other council offices and a sea of community supporters to pass renter protection legislation to assist those experiencing financial hardship due to COVID-19. Again, that's not district specific, but it was addressing a clear need that I saw in the 3rd. Even just in the short time I've been in office, my staff was fielding at least 1 question per day from our constituents who were concerned about making the rent or being evicted. And having that be the norm in my district really frightened me. And so we sprang into action. I introduced my first ever bills in early May and ending up holding my first housing committee hearings on these bills as well. We worked with some incredible neighbors who shared their stories, as well as advocates and educators who shed light on why assisting renters is such a critical issue. And I also want to point out that PACDC was crucial to us passing that legislation. All but 1 of our bills passed in June, and I learned a ton about the legislative process and what it takes to move something across the finish line. I'm also incredibly grateful for the support that I received from other council members, and from the support I received from constituents that reminded us what we were fighting for. The final example I'll highlight here isn't one specific project, but it's more of my broader commitment to lending my voice and my platform to amplifying the needs and visions of community members. We've been standing with neighbors all over the district as they respond to new market rate development being proposed in their communities. There are too many examples to list here. We have development going on all over the district. We monitor ZBA activity every week. And we've been standing with community in opposition, even when it feels difficult to do so. And we don't win every time, but we know that our voice matters a lot. And we know that our residents deserve to have a say in how their neighborhoods develop. Even when zoning variances are not required, we work to convene meetings between neighbors and developers and help to present the community's priorities. Because even if it's not legally required, I think it's important for new builders to act like the new neighbors that they are. They have to respect what's come before them from the community and see how they can fit into the community instead of working around or trying to sidestep the community. Last slide. So even in some of the examples that I listed just now, there are quite a few lessons learned and ways that I want to adapt for the future. One of the biggest lessons learned is that being active in equitable development work requires both proactive and reactive measures at the same time. And in the daily throes of a typical day as a city council member, that can be a hard thing to do and to manage. It's a mix of policy work and providing support at a property by property, project by project, block by block level. And doing that work well requires us to be quick, to cover a lot of ground because it's a big district, and to be thorough and thoughtful in how we're doing it. Now that I've gotten through my first few months, there are a few areas that I want to focus on that I think hit both the district-wide level and the block or neighborhood level. First, I want to publish our new housing report as a way of shedding light on district housing challenges, setting transparent goals we can be held accountable for, and hopefully so community members can use this as a tool for their own advocacy efforts. I also want to look at the district zoning through an equity lens, not just remapping because like 2035 says we should, but in order to protect our community assets, increase affordable housing, and amplify community voices. And related to that, I intend to prioritize publicly owned vacant land in our district towards preserving affordable housing, protecting community spaces, and land ownership as wealth building. We've done a little bit of this so far this year, but I want to do a lot more. And so I know that was a lot, but I hope it's a helpful glimpse into the work of one council office to see how people can work with their elected officials on equitable development throughout the city. And I know we'll get into more with questions, so I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Gautier. So now we'll go into a larger Q&A session where we can ask questions to all of the panelists. But I'll start with a question directed towards Councilmember Gautier. Do you have any suggestions or strategies for community members to approach their government representatives about, say, like CBAs or concerns about equitable development in their communities?
Yes, I'd say approach them very honestly about that. We don't draft. We don't see our role as drafting CBAs for our community members, but on a routine basis, we assist community groups and we facilitate this process, right? On a routine basis, we convene conversations between neighbors and developers. And I think that's a fair ask of particularly a district council office. And so I would say just go up and ask. And if you need our help to make the ask, we're happy to do that too.
And coming off of that question, we have an attendee who's a resident of your district. Thank you. Their question, a good forum for residents to join the conversation, learn and share ideas. They're looking for a space to learn and contribute without pushing into
this is not the only way to get involved, but I'm a big fan of RCOs, or registered community organizations. I think that they are great places for neighbors to come together, to connect to one another, to organize and have meaningful conversations about neighborhood development. They also have a defined role within our zoning code, and they have a defined place within the development process. And so as soon as I'm from the 3rd district and I moved back here as an adult, but as soon as I moved back, the first thing I did was join the RCO. And then like the 3rd week, they asked me to be the president. And I was like, sure. But it was important to me because every neighborhood should have a place where folks can come together to really interface with development. So I'd highly recommend it.
Great, thank you.
The Citizens Planning Institute too is also an amazing resource for our city that helps to have neighbors be more informed about interfacing with development and helps to really grow neighborhood leadership.
We also have a question directed towards Steve, but the rest of the panelists might also have something to say about this too. The question is there a good resource or 101 primer for understanding the development process?
Yes, so I've actually taught something like that for RCOs and CDCs from time to time. The Community Planning Institute that the Planning Commission runs has resources, and they also do trainings. Their trainings are good, but I'll say that what they're missing, because I think they legitimately don't think it's their place to do this, is they won't teach you about strategy and how to influence development. They will teach you about the development process. They'll teach you the role of an RCO or a CDC, but they won't necessarily help you, with strategy for how to influence the outcome. So that's something that I've actually done in the past for this organization, for PACDC, and be happy to do that again. And maybe we can create some kind of a workshop on that in the future.
Another question that we have is on data. What role, and this is for anyone, What role does data collection and analysis play in the mission of equitable development?
I'll answer from my perspective. I think it's huge, right? The reason why I wanted to commission a housing study to have more specifics on the affordable housing gap in my district is because I was having all of these conversations with developers and constantly pushing and negotiating for them to include more affordability. And I feel like, they were treating it like, oh, that's nice. Like, you're so kind. That's a good aim, for you to have. But I wanted more specificity about what was exactly going on. It was my sense that what was being built, or that what is being built, is not really what people can afford. And I wanted to be able to speak to that in very specific terms, and to have it be taken seriously. So I think data is key, especially when you're going against some pretty strong market forces.
I want to just build on that to say that it allows you to know where you are, what your starting point is, and also comparing that to where you should be.
Perfect. We have another question. What would, and I know this is like kind of a big question, maybe overgeneralized, but what would you say is the current biggest roadblock for equitable development in Philadelphia? And this is for anyone. I know it's an intimidating question, maybe.
I'll go. I would say policies that tend to favor sort of big interest, big moneyed interest, right? Folks who have the ability to hire lobbyists oftentimes are not the most vulnerable folks. And I would also say a lack of resources. We're, as a city, sometimes I feel like we're juggling between the need to bring in revenue and the need to serve people in our city that are in need. So as an example, we have a ton of publicly owned vacant land and property. But if we're constantly figuring out how to meet revenue goals through that vacant land and property, it's going to be in conflict with us using that to serve the people who need to be served. And that's just one example.
So as a lawyer, I would say that we have like these fundamental contradictions in our legal system that were basically baked in from the beginning. We give a very high priority to the private property rights in our common law, in our statutes, and in our court opinions. And that basically means that a property owner is allowed to develop a property in a way that has no community equitable public benefit in any way to anyone else. As long as it doesn't hurt someone else, create a nuisance, diminish the quality of life or the value of neighboring properties, then they have the privilege and the right, actually, it's not just a privilege, but they have a constitutional right that was baked in by folks in this city a bunch of hundreds of years ago to do that. And so that system is at odds with a more with any kind of policies that seek to move our land use policy in a way that is towards equity and justice. And that for that reason, community benefits agreements, for example, can't really be required by law, because no one can force somebody to do the right thing or the just thing. And when there have been attempts to make a community benefit agreement into some kind of a statutory requirement, they get struck down unless they're so kind of watered down that they really don't do much of anything. So it's we, in our capitalist system with very like high regard for private property rights, we have to we have all these different, you know, remedies or strategies around both elected officials and community groups and other good stakeholders in our community to move towards that. But if you have people who are opposed to it, then you have a fight on your hands. You know, that's the way it is.
I would add, if I may, that there's also sort of this really harmful philosophy that I think still exists around what people who don't have a lot of money deserve and what they're worth. So I find it incredibly offensive that we kind of accept this idea that amenity-rich neighborhoods are only for people that have a high level of income. The neighborhoods where you have good, you know, quality schools and transit and parks and grocery stores, those should only be for people who earn a lot of money. I think anybody should be able to live in a desirable neighborhood, and that's how I'm trying to gear the land use policy in the 3rd district. But I don't know that that is a commonly accepted idea, or that plays itself, or that runs through a lot of our policy now.
Yeah, I want to add that some of that goes to quantifying the harm that is done when a development occurs, or the harm that's done when government agencies choose to invest in wealthier, more affluent communities instead of making those investments in other communities. So I think that with data, you can prove the harm that's done, and the government can be moved to take action to mitigate those harms.
I'll add also that I agree with all that, and I would say there's also clear examples here in Philly where our government chooses not to hold private landowners accountable when they could. So, you know, I talked about leverage points and public subsidies are a clear place where the community should have leverage. But we have something that everyone knows about, that is a public subsidy, a tax subsidy that goes to virtually every developer in every parcel of land, and even to regular folks who are just renovating their properties. And our city has never held that the 10-year tax abatement is a public subsidy that should put accountability, you know, limits on it. So we even don't take advantage as a society, as a government, to assert like equitable standards and accountability where we could. No one has to get a tax abatement. They apply for it, and it's basically, the application is, there's nothing to it except for, you know, are you building something on your property, and you know, show us your plans or your invoice or something, and then you're good. We're gonna like wipe out all your taxes for a whole bunch of time. So there are like low-hanging fruit kind of things that could be done, but it just like revisiting and re-looking at what our landscape already is, and locating new points that we could put inject like justice and equity into.
Great, thank you, all of you. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. We have a question from an attendee for Councilmember Gautier. I'll read the whole thing as it's written. Recent zoning remapping of several key neighborhood properties provided a gift to developers, allowing them to build without any community input, particularly around the question of including affordable housing units. Remapping proposals are often under the control of civic association zoning boards and the local city planner. How can you ensure that the community at large is involved in these critical remapping decisions?
Sure. I think it's really important to have engagement as we make these decisions. I think it's really important to have neighbors feel like they understand zoning and that they understand how we can use it as an effective frame for equitable development. I talked before about how much I value RCOs. I absolutely do, but they're also not the end all be all. As we're going about these conversations, we have to have broad public engagement to make sure that we're not missing people. And so as we go forward with rezoning in the third, under my team, I mean, obviously I can't speak to what happened before, we plan to do pretty robust engagement with RCOs, but also, we want to give people outside of those structures the opportunity to participate.
Thank you. And I'll ask one more attendee question. It's also directed towards Councilmember Gautier. And it says, when I was working with a group of neighbors trying to stop the sale of the Arvilla, an apartment building housing residents in need of rent support, we met with council members Blackwell and Jim. Councilmember Jim let us know that if we were looking for any legislative solutions to the problem of improving the affordable housing situation, we would be disappointed. How are you working with your fellow council members to change this situation? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, so a lot of our policy is geared towards housing, some of which we worked on with Councilmember Gim, and she's a fighter in this area too. I think this is incredibly important. I mean, during the last session, I described working on the Emergency Housing Protection Act, which helps renters who are suffering because of a COVID-related income loss. I wanted to do mandatory inclusionary zoning last session. I didn't get to it because of all of the crises that happened. I think we need a policy that mandates that we have to have affordability in what's being built. I don't understand why we would leave whether or not we have affordable housing up to the market or up to the benevolence of developers. And so right now my office, like, we're in this constant push and pull with folks who are developing in the district around how much affordability they're going to include. We just need to mandate that. We just need to say that so that it's not such a struggle. Additionally, beyond mandatory inclusionary zoning, I think we do have to have more protections around properties like our villa that are going to, when their tax credits expire. And so this situation is going to pop up again and again and again in the district, where we have tax credit funded properties that are outside of the tax credit period, and then the owners have to make a decision around whether they want to keep that property in use or whether they want to sell it and essentially make a profit. Councilmember Green did put forward a bill last session requiring advance notice for sales for properties like our villa. And those changes took effect this spring, but I think we have to make those policies even stronger. And I think we also need to come up with more money to support the renovation and rehabilitation of those policies. So those are just some of the things that we're thinking about, but I believe that we need a whole package of legislation that really helps to maintain affordability in this city.
Thank you. I think I'll put one more question out there for the group before we wrap up, because we're almost out of time. The question is, how do you address or counteract the seemingly inevitable displacement that seems to come with new development?
Who's that question for?
For anyone who feels like they have something to say about it. I guess like proactive strategies to address the pattern that seems to happen so often.
I feel like that's a good Steve question.
Really? Well, when I was doing zoning work for Anna Verna in the second Councilmanic district, what I saw all over the place when displacement was happening was a profound lack of respect for the dignity and and just the people who are already in a community, who are the bedrock and who are the residents and who really make up a community. And this notion that maybe it goes back to the Tower of Babel, where that development isn't about putting up physical structures on dirt. It's about how we build and create and foster our communities. And we don't like to live outside, you know, because of the weather and everything. So we need to live inside, which is a good thing. We like to, when there's not a COVID pandemic, we like to work inside. So we need a lot of buildings, we need a lot of structures, but there's no community that happens with just a bunch of buildings. It's only people. And so it just has to start with a fundamental like respect and recognition that development has to be done with complete respect for the dignity and for the value of everyone in every neighborhood. And when you just start with that basic, to me it's a very obvious thing, but to some people it isn't. If you start with that basic understanding, then development with displacement isn't something that's like an option. Like you can't plan, or you wouldn't want to create a project that would create displacement. You would want to design and promote projects that preserve and protect the dignity and respect for everyone. So that's something that elected officials like Councilmember Gaudier are very clear about in how they approach any kind of a development decision. And so I think community folks, at least the community folks who are not the new people who sometimes come in and don't see or just want to ignore or want to wish away the folks who are already there, but people who are have that kind of a mindset and have that kind of an understanding. That's we need to just build up and promote and basically delegitimize the mindset and the attitude that people are displaceable, are disposable, that it's that what's important is these structures and the gleaming whatever. That's just not the essence of what our country is about. That's not what it means in any religious faith to celebrate the dignity of all of us. And so to me, it just kind of goes into that.
I would build on that to go back to what Steve and the council member was saying about all the decision points there are in the development process for tax abatement, for permits, for zoning changes. I think we need to consider how quickly we say yes, and how fast the pace of development needs to go. I mean, I think we only have so much land. There are only so many opportunities for development and redevelopment. And at each opportunity, I think we really need to ask ourselves, is this something, you know, is making this zoning change, is granting this permit, is
providing this subsidy, is that something that meets the needs of the community, or does it do something else? And if it does something else, I don't think we need to be so quick to say yes.
Great. Thank you, all of you, for being panelists and participating, and thank you to all the attendees for asking questions and staying through the whole presentation. I believe the slides will be sent out to everyone by PACDC within the next couple days. And you can see all of our panelists and their Twitter handles on the screen right now. And yeah, thank you all so much.
Thanks.
So long.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a great day.
Thanks,
Thanks.
you too.
And thank you to all of our panelists.